in fear.
The Old Church. Hi there, everyone. This will be another part of the strangeness that has been my life. However, it just seemed right, since I shared my first story, so I would be only fair I share this one too. My name is Joe. I'm a 24-year-old man. I live in Utah, and if you have read the title, you'll know that this is about an older church. When I used to go as a child at 6 years old, I grew up around and inside the churches that have infested the entire state. Anyone that's been around Utah knows exactly what I'm talking about. Those that don't, there's a lot of churches around here. So much so, throw a rock in a direction and follow and you will visit one. I will start off by telling you all about my childhood a bit. I grew up into an adoptive family. During that time, 2006 was growing, with the dynamic being my mom, dad, newly adopted sister and me. This year happened to be the same year my consciousness formed and memories started forming into my long-term brain. My thinking during the time wasn't entirely clear, but my memory makes my body feel a shudder throughout my innards. I believe it's time to get into my background during this year. For those that don't want to know, feel free to skip the next paragraph. Though the context is that I was abused, making my prayers to God much stronger. So there is that warning. My father was a drunk. I feel I don't need to explain more here. My mother was more self-preservative than I could ever know. Days and nights blended together in my head a lot from my childhood. My mind blocked out a lot of those moments. My abusive was much more than my sister. Mostly because I took protective stance and hid my sister often while my mother would leave us there in the horrors of my father's drunken feast. This happened this whole year, all while the main story occurs. Prayers. These were what kept me company after I had been left blooded. Sundays were always somewhat of a safe haven at times. If you haven't been, there is a room inside some churches that's a large room with lots of windows used for prayer specifically. Sometimes in my church we used it for events or for youth group prayer. Never made very many friends in school or inside my time at church. However, this is where things always felt weird, and my memory persists something was wrong even as a 6-year-old child. The light of the day would shine through the windows inside the room and I would pray, sometimes by myself, praying my heart out that God had a plan to save me and my sister from the pain, asking questions like why us? Were we bad kids? Did our parents love us? All hard questions to listen to, especially coming from such an innocent boy. Even Sunday I would end up in that room, either alone or with few, staying until the church would close. As we only lived in a block away from my house, my family would leave me there knowing I knew my way home. It must have happened sometime in the summer when I first noticed it. I was praying just like I did every other Sunday when I caught a glimpse of it in the sunshine. A proclaimed button on the back left side of the statue. This was odd and my child's curiosity got the best of me. I pressed it. I remember a door unlocking from behind the statue. Behind, small enough at the time, I squeezed past and opened it, closing it behind me. It was dim but had some light from the old bulbs that lined the halls before me. I wasn't as scared as I probably should have been, but from my previous story, you will know I wasn't always the brightest. These halls were small to say the least. My own body could barely maneuver between the walls and it didn't seem to get larger by any means. I recall walking for some time. To a child it was an eternity, a whole 20 minutes, but I finally reached another door by then. I pushed it open to reveal that the way was sealed by brick and cement. Saddened to not find Narnia at the end of the halls, I turned back and walked back. I made it back in time as the person closing didn't even notice I left and escorted me out of the church. This wasn't the last time I would visit, obviously. I took a crude tool I made on my own, calling it my pickaxe. It was two old hammers I found in my father's shed and happened to stick them on one hammer handle with nothing but caveman brute force and hopes I could get through that brick and cement to see what was behind it. The pickaxe was just the two hammer heads with the nail removers facing outward. I remember this took me about a month's time to craft. The next time I visited the door was on a Saturday when we still had access to the church but no sermon was held. So I took my weekends very seriously that fall. I would leave my pickaxe and a Ninja Turtles backpack there so I could dump the rocks and rubble just outside in the schoolyard a few feet down. The expeditions became my childhood obsession, an escape from my home life. It was only after I started living that my mother took my sister with her to my aunt's house on the weekend. I continued throughout school when it picked back up in September. By this point, however, I was getting closer than I ever thought I could. It wasn't long after this that my mom and dad got a divorce. I never minded it, honestly. My first thought was how I could stay longer and see what was finally behind that door. Never had a second thought about the implications of the divorce, and even that I was to stay with my dad for the time being. My mom always assured me she would come back for me. It never happened. Despite the small delay from this, I was quick to back to the halls. The room had stayed empty for a lot of the weekend as it got colder and colder. Less and less people would stay around the prayer area. Soon after, I remember it reached November. I was ecstatic when I breached that wall for the first time. My life hadn't been as easy that year. Yet finally I was at the cusp of my adventure and I finally would receive my treasure. It didn't matter if it was gold or a penny. I did it and it took me away from the horrors of my home life. Even if little me had no friends at the time until I met Michael, Ben and Austin later on. As in my previous escape deaths, I didn't feel lonely, only that I felt happiness for what felt like the first time that year. It was only when I saw what was behind it and I did realize that I never should have chipped away at that wall. I should have stayed home and tried to make friends at school. Instead, I decided to fly too close to the sun in search of something that would change my life. Somehow, in an odd way, it did. Just not in the way I wished it would have. The breach of light hit me. I saw through the hole I had made just large enough for me to see inside. It was another church room. This one was, however, empty and dark. The windows shone only moonlight as I looked through. Yet I still knew in my head that it had only been about a couple hours according to my Spider-Man watch. Somewhere closer to 3 p.m. that afternoon. So how was this place dark? How was the moon out? Where is everyone? Why is it gross looking inside? These questions flooded my mind as I continued to chip away at the brick, to which by the end of this day I could easily stick my arm out of the hole I would created. It seemed like literal magic to me. This must be something that God has finally given me. The thought my prayers had been answered flooded my mind the following week, waiting and waiting for more answers, thinking I just had to make it to Saturday that week. By the time I had gotten back on Saturday and my expedition resumed and I was as eager as ever. When finally I had a terrible realization that same evening, my pickaxe was severely beaten and broken due to me just smacking it against the wall with all my force. It looked disheveled and honestly I think back now and it most certainly should have broken many weeks prior. So what is my solution? Replace the tops with my dad's two other hammer heads I had found earlier that summer. Wasn't like he ever left his room other than to grab another pack of Miller. Then I should have seen something coming after taking the hammers. My dad soon went to work on a project and found that his hammers had gone missing and I was the only one at the house. So inevitably I got grounded and beat. Luckily I left my bag and pickaxe at the halls. The next 2 weeks were agonizingly slow. Thoughts of what would be through that odd magic door rushed through my head endlessly. So much so I didn't even get that much sleep by the end of the weeks. Regardless, I went to church that Saturday morning. The same people there tried to greet me, but I ignored them this time. Many were concerned about the black eye I had that was just barely going away now. At last I made it back to the spot I dug. I saw my Ninja Turtle backpack and my pickaxe waiting for me. The hole, however, was larger than I had previously remembered, enough so that my body almost fit. My child brain assumed that maybe it had been something like wind or something. We just learned about erosion a bit in school, so it seemed logical at the time. Within the hour I was in, I left my bag and pickaxe and entered the old church. I looked around and found myself in a regularly lit room with the sun out and shining, though I didn't understand why it looked like nighttime when I went looking through the sealed doorway earlier. My first thought was that maybe it was just later than I thought it was. My watch said 6 p.m., which meant I had about an hour before my dad would notice I wasn't home. So I journeyed forward. The church resembled the one I came from. Early so, same statue, same layout. Even the same odd scratches and bumps I used to notice on the walls. The same all around, but just backwards, like everything had flopped on its head. When I left the larger prayer room identical to the one I had left to go get out of here, I saw a man at the podium. He didn't look like my own pastor. He wore darker clothing and wore a symbol I never saw before, almost resembling the cross you might see at a train stop. He also spoke about a scripture that I don't remember, reading from a book that was much thicker and more dense than that one I saw regularly on the weekends. Confused, I just listened. The sermon intrigued me, felt even more fulfilling than the current Bible I recognized. I still remembered the line that was spoken that drove it home for me. To he who seeks heaven and hell shall find it. Not to he who merely thinks about the idea, but the ones that created in their mind, eye, and heart. Heaven and hell are but concepts bestowed upon by the false idols of this world. This one true idol shan't be the idea of those idols, but the belief in oneself as the idol you imagine to be true. I wrote down these words in my little notepad I had brought along to catalog my journey. Listening to this filled me with the idea that I was in control of the things that happened, but not my father, not God. Joe, after the sermon, which lasted only a few minutes after the statement, I would walk up and talk to the man who spoke so clearly. I remember our small conversation from the notes I took. "Hey there, mister. Hey, buddy. Did you like the sermon?" He spoke so calmly and warm that I almost cried upon hearing him. "That was really cool what you said. Thank you. But I haven't seen you here before. Where are you from?" The calmness in his voice never once struck me with malice. "Down the street near the school, right next to the 7-Eleven. I get slashes there sometimes." I remember how hot my face was as I did my best to try and impress what I thought could be my new friend. "Oh, yeah, I know where you're talking about. Do you know where you were at, buddy?" His question was the first time I felt he had some concern in his voice. "No, I just found out this place was here," I recalled vividly, looking down in shame. "Well, we're not really outside. See." He revealed to me that a light on the windows could be turned on and off, showing a moonlight night or what was currently the daytime light. Stunned, I immediately went into a small panic. "Then where is this place?" He looked at me almost with a hateful look only a man I knew all too well would give me. I fully expected to be bit at this point. To my surprise, he didn't. He just told me a story. "What's your name, buddy?" "Joe, I'm 6. "Joe, that's funny. My name is Joseph, but my friends can call me Joe." His face turned into a very heartfelt smile. "Hi there, Mr. Joseph." "Hey, I said my friends call me Joe. We're friends, aren't we, Joe?" This sentence made me feel a little more weary, but nothing that seriously made me question anything. "Yeah. Hi, Joe. Joe, would you like to hear my story? How did I get here? Then maybe we can talk about how you got here. This felt warranted. After all, we did just met, and I was curious how he ended up here without my genius pickaxe. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think at this point my nerves got the best of me as I started to swing my legs back and forth. He started. Joe, it was 1979 and I was just right out of the high school. I was gonna end up in the U. You know what the U is, right? He chuckled as I nodded, but this pause wasn't long before he started up again. I made it there. Met a beautiful, beautiful girl. Her name was Mary. She was the love of my life, Joe. She was my everything. I used to go with her everywhere. To the parlor where she would drink soda and ice cream with her friends. I would see her at the park or the drive-in theater sometimes. She'd always be so hard to get through, Joe. She never said yes a single time I asked her out. Over and over throughout my college years, I would ask and ask. It drove me nuts. He laughed so hard he threw himself into a coughing fit. After it, he began again after patting my back. This time his expression was heavy and looked just like how my dad used to look at me before I bidding. So I cringed back only for him to continue. Joe, do you know how lonely it is when a person you love doesn't love you back? I nodded and remember a tear or two fell from my cheeks as I recalled the way my father treated me. Yeah, I do. My dad isn't very nice to me. He wiped my tears in a caring manner. Joe, I did something really bad. I loved Mary so much and she kept saying no. I got upset and instead of talking to her, well, she had a boyfriend at the time, and I killed him, Joe. It was in their house. Afterward, Mary woke up and she couldn't believe it. She was gonna call the cops, Joe. So I ended up killing her too. The tone of his voice must have made me not think of the real intentions of the story. So you are a bad person then? I reluctantly asked. Passionate, Joe. I did everything I could time and time again only for her not to love me. I found this place after I killed her. She went to church in the other building. I curved all the rest of the bumps and scratches so that it would look like a reflection to most. I found this place with a button. Came here and I sealed up the entrance. Gathered up food and water from the store nearby, and everything down here works great, buddy. I don't have to go back up. This also means I can't let you leave. If the police find me, then it's still all over and you can't hear my sermons anymore. Don't you want to hear more? Not quite understanding the situation at hand, I nodded and agreed. I couldn't go back to my dad after finding this kind person with a warm voice. Though I wrote most of what he said in my notepad that night, I slept in what felt like home for the first time in forever. I asked Joe why the place was built before we went to bed. He told me a small story about how the halls were supposed to wind it so that it could be a two-story church capable of housing more people than any other church could. The building process became too pricey, so they stopped production, but apparently it turned to legend and he stumbled upon it when running away from his crime. Coming to the church to repent, he found a book inside left by some teenagers. Apparently a book on satanic beliefs were the only things he had close to him. So he wore the robes and ended up preaching to himself every weekend since. He dyed it a purple black from the some bits and vinegar. I enjoyed my night with Joe. He was my friend. A week had passed by. I hadn't left Joe's side as he taught me the insides and outs of the satanic Bible he held in his hands. I listened so intently that I couldn't even think about going home now. I had food, candies, water, and juice boxes, all sort of stuff. These were old storage stuff to last at least 40 years. Shelves and shelves of goods. For one man, he would only gone through about 5 years worth. He taught me about some of the power he felt from fasting, an idea I strongly hated at the time, but still I respected him for it. It wasn't long before he indoctrinated me as his first discipline. I felt like I had a dad for the first time. He talked to me about school and everything in my life so far. He helped me learn to actually tie my shoes. He ended up teaching me more than I could ever learn from my dad back in the home. By this point, it had been 3 weeks. I felt comfortable with Joe, loved the way he made me feel. like I was finally a person, rather than a burden set upon my parents. I treated him better than I ever did the God I previously worshipped. After about a month or so, we celebrated New Year's together and made loud noise and sang about our scripture, and I thanked Satan for bringing me the thing I wanted most, a dad who loved me. 2 months in, I was cleaning the place. Joe had tried to seal the hole but failed multiple times. The stuff was a bit too old to be used now. This would mark the police's first investigative lead on me. Since my disappearance, my mother had been searching everywhere. The cameras of the church had been searched. People interrogated. My dad was the first suspect in my homicide case. I say homicide because my dad was always spouting how I went and got myself killed. February marked an interesting time for me. The police found out my patterns. This led them down the path of getting a search warrant for the church. They found the button in March of 2007. Shortly after this, they found the wall, found my bag, and found the pickaxe. They blew it down, they shot Joe, and saved me. Little did they know I never wanted to go back. I still believe his teachings. He was my dad. He will always be my dad in my heart. I love you, Joe. I miss you. Wish we had more time.